Standing by live outdoors where the Bills are on the practice field is our man Chris Brown. Hello, Chris Brown. Do you have the same? No,
Good
you have
afternoon,
a
guys.
top than we have on.
Yeah, he's got a nice down. That's a nice jacket.
That's a nice one.
Yeah.
Hey, welcome, Chris. Hey, we want to talk to you about who's practicing and who's not, but I don't want to get hung up on that. This, to me, is an intriguing matchup with the Philadelphia Eagles, and it's going to take a lot to beat them, I think, don't you?
Yeah, I think this is a team that can rise up and has the talent level to compete with just about anybody in the league. So you really don't know what you're going to get necessarily from an Eagles team that has largely underachieved this season, due in part to the enormous number of injuries that they have sustained, whether it's Deshaun Jackson, their primary deep threat on the offensive side of the ball, or a slew of injuries at the defensive tackle position, which includes Malik Jackson, who's on IR, and Tim Jernigan. So they're in a situation, guys, where on the defensive line this week, they're going to have to start one of the two players they signed off practice squads on Monday and Tuesday. One of those guys is going to have to start next to Fletcher Cox because they simply have no one else after putting Hassan Ridgeway on injured reserve yesterday, who got injured in the Dallas game last week.
One of the things you got to acknowledge, though, about these Philadelphia Eagles, they've been good enough to play extremely well. The problem they've had has been turnovers offensively. Carson Wentz, when he hasn't turned it over, has played really well. He's 13 TDs. I mean, the guy's still a quality quarterback. And the Eagles have been their own worst enemy in their losses.
Right, and holding on to the football is the problem. They've lost 8 fumbles this season, which is tied for 4th most in the league. And they lost 2 more last week, and it was one of the reasons why they were behind on the scoreboard to Dallas in a big way early in that football game. And points allowed has been a gigantic problem for them. In 6 of their 7 games, they've given up 24 points or more, 5 of those 27 points or more, and there's a couple of 30-pointers in there as well. So they've really just got to batten down the hatches on defense and get more stops. But again, injuries have played a role in that. Their secondary has been beat up with injuries. Sidney Jones, a former second-round pick of theirs a couple of years ago, who has played early in the season and is healthy, was benched last week for ineffectiveness, and they started a couple of other players. Now those players are out with injuries, and it looks like Sidney Jones is going to have to start in the slot, which is not his primary position. So it could be a big week for Cole Beasley, going against a guy who doesn't have a ton of experience in there, but they're going to have to line him up there because their primary nickel guy, Avonte Maddox, doesn't look like he's ready to come back from injury. Ronald Darby was a healthy scratch last week. I mean, he was healthy, he was active, but he didn't play. So it's really interesting to see some of the roster decisions that they've had to make due to injury and some that they've made despite having players who are healthy. They're looking for effective play back there, and they just haven't gotten it.
Chris Brown on the sidelines at Bills practice live with us right now. Let's talk about the Bills for a second. And I want to ask you about Josh Allen, Chris. And you've documented it. We all know it. Turnovers have been an issue for Josh and the Buffalo offense. And yet, last 2 games, he's turned it over once. Has he turned the corner? Is there any way to tell that at this point?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any way to put your finger on, yep, he's got it fixed. He's still a young quarterback. He's only in what's this going to be, his 18th start of his career. Even he admitted to us yesterday he still hasn't seen everything that defenses can throw at a young quarterback. And according to John Feliciano, who I spoke to yesterday, opponents have thrown a ton at them defensively on purpose to try to get Josh off his game, cross him up, get him to make a bad decision. To his credit, as you mentioned, he's done better the last 2 weeks. Let's just see if he can sustain that level of discerning when to take a risk, when to hold on to it, or heck, even when to take a sack, because an 8-yard loss is always better than a turnover. So I thought he did that once or twice in last week's game where he just took the sack and, the offense got to live for another down, albeit at a bad down and distance, but still they had the football. And I think it's those kinds of decisions, where discretion is the better part of valor, in his decision-making. And so I think he's on the right track to making more of the right decisions more often, but I don't know if I'm ready to stamp him as he's cured of the turnover bug. It's never going to happen again.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to happen at some point. I mean, you don't go your entire career or even a month without turning it over at some point. But I got to ask you this. We are playing a Philadelphia Eagles team that is nicked up across the board. The Bills have some injuries of note. Who do you think has the best chance to bounce back and be in the game this week, and who do you think will still remain out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm liking Kevin Johnson coming back from his stinger/neck injury. He was in a red non-contact jersey yesterday. He has shed the red non-contact jersey, so hopefully that's a good sign. Who knows? We'll know after today's practice. Maybe he's even a full-scale participant here today. Quentin Spain is back in practice. He is lining up with the first unit, so that's certainly an encouraging sign for him. So if that continues the rest of the week, you would expect him to be back in the lineup on Sunday, and obviously that's an important piece up front, knowing what this Philadelphia defensive line can throw at them. So, yeah, I would probably pin it on those two guys.
What about Duke Williams?
Still in the red non-contact jersey, but practicing. So hopefully it's just a general soreness thing where they just don't want that shoulder engaging in any meaningful contact out here. You know, we don't really have a long track record on Duke and his tolerance for pain, because I'm guessing here, but I would tend to think if he's practicing that it's really just a pain management issue. But we'll have to hear from Coach after practice today to see if he can shed any light on Duke's situation and what his prognosis is going forward here with respect to Sunday.
Hey, Chris Brown, by the way, Bills Insider, BuffaloBills.com, reporting for us from the sidelines at Bills practice today. And if you're tuned in on the MSG side, you just saw Duke Williams look extremely healthy down the sideline with a deep pass.
It ain't his legs that hurt, it's his shoulder. He can run good. Yeah.
Hey, we talked a lot with you last week about the motor, Devin Singletary, coming back, wondering what his role might be. He did not have an extensive role against Miami. He did not have a ton of carries. Is there more to come with him, or do you think that's what we're looking at as far as his the role he plays and the work he gets in this Buffalo offense?
Yeah, I think they were just easing him back into the fold last week, kind of getting his feet wet again after barely playing 2 games in his NFL career and then getting a month layoff. That's an adjustment for a rookie to make. And so I think they just wanted to give him enough work to get back into the flow, feel the speed of the game, get his reads in a game-like setting back down with respect to the run game and reading the blocks. And, you know, I thought he did pretty well last week, and I think if the coaching staff feels the same, well, then, yes, his role should increase, and I think it will. To what degree, I'm not sure, but I think he will see the ball a little bit more this week.
Yeah, it's interesting because as much conversation as we've had and fans have had about Devin Singletary and his contributions early, we don't know what we got here, right? I mean, we still don't know what Devin Singletary will do well. We've seen some flashes, but he didn't touch the ball that much before he was injured, but was really effective when he did. I still think the Bills need to find out some things about Devin Singletary. And as much conversation, as deep as they are into the regular season, they still have a big question mark with the young running back.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have a firm grasp of what they believe he can be, but the proof is in the pudding, and he's going to have to show it on the field. And I think he'll get the opportunity to do that, and that's a good thing, because as much as we all respect Frank Gore, you know, I don't think a 250-touch season is something you want to be doing with Gore, even despite the fact that he has defied the laws of age in this league with him now being in his 15th season. So I think slowly but surely the workload is going to kind of balance out between Gore and Singletary chiefly, and then Yeldon after that.
While we're on the topic of running backs, our MSG viewers can see Patrick DeMarco out there. Chris, he did not practice at all yesterday, right, with an ankle. Do you think that he is back full speed?
Yeah, he's back practicing today. Most of the guys that were taking their veteran rest days are back, including Lorenzo Alexander and Ty Nsekhe. Looks like we have a couple of other veterans, though, taking a rest day. At least that's our assumption at this point. Jerry Hughes and Star Latulele are both getting the day off today. Presumably that's veteran rest days, as is Frank Gore, as is typical on Thursdays. Frank usually practices Wednesday, sits Thursday, and that is the case again here this week.
Do you think this Buffalo offense is up to taking advantage of a Philadelphia secondary that has been picked on, quite frankly? I mean, this is a defense that, you know, it's been the story coming out of Philadelphia all season. Are the Bills up to it? I mean, they had some success against the Dolphins.
Right. I think if you're asking the fan base about that, they would probably say no, because big plays haven't been there with as much regularity maybe as they anticipated going into this season, knowing Josh Allen's arm strength and some of the deep threats that this offense has in its arsenal. That could change from one week to the next. I mean, as Brian Dable says all the time, every week is different with respect to game plan, with respect to matchups, and what they feel they can exploit. So if they feel they have an injury-riddled secondary in the Eagles who are susceptible to big plays. Now, they haven't given up an inordinate number of big plays, but they have given up some. And I think if Brian Dable and the offensive staff believe they have the horses that can run by them, and Josh can get some good chemistry in the practice setting here this week with those weapons, well then, yeah, I think maybe they dial it up a half a dozen times in the game instead of maybe just 2 or 3 times.
One more injury to check with you, Chris. Matt Milano limited yesterday with his hamstring, did not play last week against Miami. Do you see him out there, and what do you think his prospects are?
Yeah, I mean, he's out here running around. As I said yesterday, we know this athletic training and medical staff's history with soft tissue injuries. They err heavily on the side of caution, and, we're only 2 weeks removed. I guess it'll be 3 full weeks by the time we get to Sunday since Milano sustained the injury, counting the bye week in there. So I suppose if we see in the practice report today that he's a full participant, that would certainly be an encouraging sign, especially if he is again on Friday. I think that would spell a likely return for Matt Milano. But I think short of that, if he's limited throughout the week, I'd be surprised if he dresses, quite frankly. And then, as we mentioned yesterday, that will trigger the importance of Corey Thompson's availability, because if he too is unavailable, then we're back to Maurice Alexander being back out there with the starting base unit. I should also mention, guys, Kurt Coleman not practicing again for a second straight day with that hamstring injury, so it's looking less and less likely that he'll be available for special teams duty on Sunday.
How about you, Chris? You full or limited today?
I'm full, man. I'm ready. Let's do it.
Very
Thanks,
nice.
Chris. We
Good to
appreciate
know.
it. Thank you.